Hi, this is Mrs. Reister, and I'm going to be guiding you through Lesson 6.3, Solving One-Step Equations. So our goal here is to find out the value of x, or the variable. Now, x is the most commonly used variable, but sometimes we use other variables. So our steps for how we do that, we begin by isolating that variable. And we do that by using our properties of equality, which really just means that whatever you do to one side, you must also do to the other. So what we do is we use our inverse operations, and what that does is it undoes what is already in that equation. So we're going to work backwards. And working backwards is the idea of using inverse operations. So our inverse operations here, to undo addition, or the inverse operation of addition, is subtraction. And to undo subtraction, or the inverse of subtraction, we're going to add. To undo multiplication, we divide, or we can multiply by the reciprocal. And so at some point throughout the notes, you'll see that where we are multiplying with a fraction. So to undo that, we would multiply by the reciprocal. And to undo division, we multiply. So to check our answer, we can substitute the value you found for the variable back into your equation to make sure that it makes a true statement. So one thing that I've always enjoyed about solving equations is I never had to wait for a teacher or anyone to tell me if I've solved it correctly, because I could check using substitution to know if I found the correct value for the variable. So one more thing to talk about here that's really critical, specifically in 7th grade math, but really just moving forward. When it says to show your work, when we're talking about equations, this means showing the operation that you are doing to each side of the equation. So while you might not need to write out the actual operation that you're doing, you're going to note what operation you're doing. So let's look at this example here. To solve the equation x plus 4 equals 10, we need to use inverse operations to cancel or get rid of plus 4. Well, looking at our inverse operations, to undo addition, we're going to subtract. So we're going to subtract 4 on each side. So if we look here, we're subtracting 4 on the left side of the equal sign, which undoes it, or it cancels it out. So I'm just left with x on the left side of my equal sign. And I'm going to do the same thing on the right side of my equal sign, except it's going to be 10 minus 4. Now, I know that I could do that in my head. 10 minus 4, we know that that is 6. But I'm still going to show what I am doing, because what this does is it shows that we have a procedural understanding of the inverse operations and how we use those to solve for our variables. So let's take a look below at example 1, and let's do some of these together. So for example 1, we have x plus 15 equals 123. So again, inverse operations here, my operation in my equation is plus 15, or addition. So the inverse of addition is subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 15 on both sides. because what we do to one side, we must also do to the other. And I draw my line to show that I'm going from one step to the final step of solving for x. So I have x equals, and then I can over here do my 123 minus 15, which is 108. Now, using substitution, I can substitute 108 back in place of x, and I can check to see if it's true by taking 108 plus 15. And if that, in fact, equals 123, which makes that a true statement, then I know I have solved for x correctly. Moving on, we have 9 equals y minus 14. Inverse operation of subtraction here, I'm going to add, and I'm going to show that I am adding 14 on both sides of my equal sign. So now I'm going to take my 14 plus 9, which is 23. Again, substitution. If I put 23 in place of y, 23 minus 14 equals 9. So I know I've solved this correctly for y. C, we've got negative 4m equals 38. So the first thing we need to talk about is when we have a variable and a coefficient together, what operation does that mean? And in this case, this is saying negative 4 times m equals 38. So the inverse of multiplication here is division. And to show that I'm going to divide, I can just put a line underneath it like that. And in this case, I'm going to divide by not only 4, but negative 4, because negative 4 is the number I have, or the coefficient that I have here. So I'm going to divide by negative 4 on the left side and on the right side. And now I'm going to take my 38 and divide that by 4. And 4 goes into 20 5 times, so 9.5. But now I need to double check because we see that we're dividing by a negative. So really, I've got a positive 38, and I'm dividing it by a negative 4. And a positive divided by a negative gives us a quotient of negative 9.5. And lastly, we've got our last equation of a over 7. And the operation that is referred to here is division. So a divided by 7 equals negative 8. Now the inverse of division is multiplication. So I'm going to multiply by 7 on the left side to isolate my variable. And I'm going to do the same thing on my right side. Multiply by 7. And so I've got negative 8 times 7. Negative 8 times 7. Negative times a positive is a negative. And 8 times 7 is 56. And I can check this here by substituting negative 56 in place of a. Negative 56 divided by a positive 7 gives me negative 8. So I know that we have solved this correctly. Just a few key reminders before you move on to your turn number 1. Make sure that you are looking real close to see what operation is in the equation, and then ask yourself, what is the inverse of that operation? And it's important to use these notes up here at the top because we've already listed the inverse operations for each of the 4 operations. And then lastly, make sure that you are checking using substitution so that you can know for sure if you have solved it correctly.